We did just hear from the sheriff of that county confirming that between 8 and 10 people are dead as a result of this shooting.
It's cold-blooded murder. Cold-blooded murder, young man.
Few things are more dangerous than a deadly weapon in the hands of an emotional teenager. Surrounded by peers, some feel invincible, leading to devastating consequences, not only for themselves, but also those who are most vulnerable that surround them. Let's witness the chilling reactions of teen killers as they face their life sentences.
16-year-old Gabriel Parker is accused of shooting and killing 2 of his classmates and injuring 14 others in the shooting back in January.
In the morning of January 23, 2018, as students of the Marshall County High School in Kentucky got ready for the start of classes, 15-year-old student Gabe Parker opened fire in an open area at the school, murdering 2 students and injuring 14 others. After he was caught, he was made to face the consequences of his actions, and his behavior in the court shocked everyone. Gabriel Ross Parker was born on the 3rd of March 2002 and grew up in a broken home, which culminated in his mother getting remarried to his stepfather. Despite this, he showed no true signs at home of being capable of violence, but sometimes the propensity to commit murder stays well hidden until the act is perpetrated. On the 23rd of January 2018, students of Parker's high school were gathering in the commons prior to the start of class, blissfully unaware of what was about to befall them. The then 15-year-old sophomore, Parker had gone to school that day with a Ruger handgun and an intent to commit murder. Parker had reportedly gone to the school's band room earlier to check with his friends before the shooting, to make sure they were not in the area before returning to begin his attack. Just before 8 a.m., Parker brought out his handgun in the commons area and emotionlessly opened fire at the unsuspecting students. In the process of fleeing, multiple students were struck by bullets while others were trampled on in the ensuing stampede. 2 of the students, Bailey Nicole Holt and Preston Ryan Cope, who were both 15 years old, succumbed to their gunshot wounds while 18 others, including 5 girls and 13 boys. After the shooting, Parker discarded his weapon and ran to the weight room to hide with other students, who had been unaware he was the shooter and motioned for him to join them in hiding. However, one of the students who was hiding in the location recognized him as the shooter and alerted a teacher in the room about his identity. The teacher then called law enforcement. The Marshall County Sheriff from the Marshall County Sheriff's Department arrived a few minutes later and located Parker and arrested him shortly after. Following his arrest, Parker's bag was searched by police, and inside was a copy of the Communist Manifesto and a large Winchester sheath knife. Meanwhile, he had been brought in for interrogation to get to the root of his actions. During the interrogation, Parker expressed that he was an atheist and revealed his disillusioned views of life. Parker also indicated the shooting was an experiment to see how students and society would respond. Parker was eventually arraigned in Marshall County Circuit Court on the 16th of February, 2018 on charges of 2 counts of murder and 4 counts of first-degree assault, and he was to be tried as an adult due to the gravity of his crimes. Due to his age, Parker was ineligible for either the death penalty or life without parole, and according to Kentucky law, he also had to be eligible for parole after serving 25 years. He would plead guilty to the charges at a hearing on the 28th of April, 2020 in exchange for a plea bargain. As part of the plea offer, 6 of the assault charges were amended to assault in the second degree, Class C felonies. On the 12th of June 2020, an 18-year-old Gabe Parker was sentenced to 2 life terms plus 70 years, with the eligibility for parole after serving 20 years. After his sentence was read out, Parker showed no emotion and merely nodded to the announcement and let his attorney speak for him.
18-year-old inmate pled guilty to all 16 charges, including 2 counts of murder for the deaths of Bailey Holt and Preston Cope.
Some victims of the shooting recounted the horrific incident and the trauma it had caused them, while the parents of the victims were expectedly infuriated while recollecting their experience and agreed that Parker deserved the life sentence, even if some did admit that they were open to forgiving him in the future.
You're a sorry, low-life demon, piece of garbage, and I can't stand the sight of you, and you will never see the light of day again, and for that I'm grateful.
A civil lawsuit was filed against Parker's parents in 2019 by the parents of 4 of the victims of the shooting, including the 2 who sadly lost their lives. They were reportedly asked to be awarded $36.7 million in compensation, although that wouldn't be enough to bring back their kids. Parker, who is now 22 years old, is currently imprisoned at the North Point Training Center in Danville, Kentucky, and will be eligible for parole in June 2040 at the age of 38. Just when you think the horror ends there, enter Ethan Crumbley and his parents.
I am a really bad person. I have done terrible things that no one should ever do. I have lied, been not trustworthy. I've hurt many people, and that's what I've done.
On the 30th of November 2021, a 15-year-old Ethan Crumbley turned up at his high school in Oxford Township, Michigan, armed with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun and a strong will to kill. Around lunchtime, he would finally get his wish as he appeared from the school bathroom, then began to shoot at anyone he could see. The teenager would end up murdering 4 students and injuring 7 people more. Ethan Crumbley was born in Atlantic Beach, Florida on the 28th of April 2006 to parents Jennifer and James, both of whom had prior minor criminal records from 1995 to 2005 for DUI and check fraud. He reportedly had a troubled childhood, with his parents often abandoning him at home, which led to him being introverted, having few friends, and often exhibiting weird behaviors. Crumbley also reportedly videotaped himself torturing animals, once allegedly keeping a baby bird's head in a jar and placing it in the school bathroom. He also frequently talked about battling with demons. Despite his obvious troubles, his parents allegedly never sought therapy for him, and those problems would ultimately lead to the events of 30th November 2021. On that fateful day, Ethan Crumbley went to his Oxford High School with the intent to shoot it up. He had already hidden his semi-automatic gun away in the school the day prior, a gun his father had bought him just the previous Friday. Some school officials had raised suspicions of Ethan to his parents that very day due to his actions, which included searching for ammunition online and making sketches of himself committing a school shooting. However, this was not properly handled, and they would realize in the worst possible way. At around 12:51 p.m. on November 30th, 2021, Crumbley was spotted coming out of the school bathroom with his gun, which he had probably hidden in there. Immediately afterwards, he started firing sporadically in the hallway with hundreds of students passing through. When they began to flee, he slowly walked down the hallway and began shooting into classrooms and at anyone who was unable to escape before moving on to the next classroom. An intercom voiceover alerted students and teachers to an active shooter, and the teachers began locking and barricading doors and also covering windows. Due to the quick response by students and staff of the school, Crumbley was unable to actually enter any of the classrooms. Nevertheless, some students and staff weren't so lucky, as Crumbley had already claimed some victims. 3 students, 17-year-old Madison Baldwin, 16-year-old Tate Meyer, and 14-year-old Hannah St. Juliana were killed at the scene, and 8 other people, including a teacher, were injured. One of the injured students, 17-year-old Justin Schilling, would succumb to his injuries in hospital the following day. Law enforcement arrived at the scene only 3 minutes after the attack started, following a 911 call, and promptly arrested Crumbley, who still had 7 rounds of ammunition loaded into his gun and 2 15-round magazines, and took him in for questioning as investigations commenced. Crumbley's cell phone was revealed to contain 2 videos, both filmed the night before the incident, where he talked about his plans to shoot and kill students at the school the following day. He also had a journal where he reportedly detailed his desire to shoot up the school in a bid to get US President Biden impeached. Crumbley's parents had been at the school earlier that day following the reports of their son's behavior, and decided against taking him home despite being fully aware that he was in the possession of an unlocked gun. Following the investigations, Ethan was charged as an adult with terrorism resulting in death, 4 counts of first-degree murder, 7 counts of assault with intent to murder, as well as 12 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. He would plead guilty to these charges at a hearing in October 2022. On the 3rd of December 2021, a prosecutor announced that both of Crumbley's parents were being charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter for their failure to secure the gun he used during the shootings. On getting this information, his parents would bizarrely decide to flee the town and miss their first arraignment date before they were eventually caught, arrested, and charged the following day. On the 9th of December 2023, Crumbley was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in what was a tense courtroom. Right before the sentencing, a remorseful Crumbley apologized to the courtroom and stated that he would accept whatever punishment was handed to him and aimed to do better. He even attempted to forgive his parents for their role in the murder.
Whatever sentence it is, I do plan to be better than I am. I don't know if you'll believe that, but records of 15, 20, 25 years can show that I will change.
The trial for Crumbley's parents was completed by the 14th of March 2024, with his dad and mom being sentenced to 10 years and 15 years in prison, respectively. During the sentencing hearing, parents of the victims vehemently blamed Crumbley's parents for neglecting their responsibilities, which was what ultimately led to the deaths of their children. Crumbley's actions led to a series of copycat school shooting threats, which resulted in over 500 schools in Michigan and 6 other states being closed. Today, he is held at the Oaks Correctional Facility in Manistee, Michigan, as he has turned 18. His mother, Jennifer, is currently imprisoned in the Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility, and his father, James, is in the Bellamy Creek Correctional Facility. But Ethan Crumbley isn't alone in this dark chapter of school shootings in the United States. Enter Demetrius Pogortzis.
Are you a citizen of the United States?
Yes, sir.
Are you requesting consideration for a court-appointed attorney?
Yes, sir.
Are you out on bond for any other charge?
No, sir.
This first case involves a teenager who would go on to perpetrate one of the deadliest school shootings of all time. The depraved actions of 17-year-old Demetrius Pogortzis over a 25-minute period at the Santa Fe High School in Santa Fe, Texas, on the 18th of May 2018, which left 10 people dead, would shock the entire United States, and his reaction when faced with the court would baffle observers. The story of Demetrius Pogortzis' actions began on the 2nd of March 2018, 2 months before it actually happened. On that day, Pogortzis, born on the 12th of October 2000, logged on to an arms purchasing website and purchased 50 rounds of .38 special ammunition, as well as 105 rounds of 12-gauge shotgun ammunition. 2 weeks later, on March 13, 2018, Pogortzis ordered an additional round of shotgun ammunition and paid using an American Express gift card, using his real name and address for shipment but not specifying his age. Pogortzis was on the honor roll at his school and played on the school football team. However, he was regarded as quiet and was reportedly often bullied by fellow students and even coaches of the football team. This suggests that he may have been plotting his revenge with the purchase of those guns. Pogortzis would finally get his chance to strike in the early morning of May 18, 2018, when he suddenly began firing his weapon into an art class of unexpecting students at the school's art complex. As he began shooting, a staff member pulled a fire alarm which caused most of the school to evacuate, but those in the art classroom weren't so lucky. Pogortzis went on a manic spree, walking into one of the classrooms and shooting at a victim while singing a popular Queen song, Another One Bites the Dust, in between shots, then proceeding to shoot through the storage closet, where most of the art students had run to hide themselves in, with a shotgun. Pogortzis then briefly left the art room, which caused students to leave the closet and attempt to barricade the art room door. However, he returned and pushed the door open, and upon spotting a student he knew, he exclaimed, "Surprise!" and shot the student in the chest. Pogortzis' shooting spree would continue for 25 minutes until Santa Fe ISD police officers arrived at the scene to confront him. Rather than surrender, he exchanged fire with the police officers and critically wounded one of them. Pogortzis continued to fire rounds randomly and even threatened to shoot more officers, which forced them to retaliate, injuring him in the process. He would eventually be arrested following his surrender due to the injury, and was detained as the police evacuated other students and staff from the art complex. At the end of his shooting exercise, Pogortzis had claimed the lives of 10 people, including 8 students and 2 teachers, as well as injuring a further 13 individuals. This makes the shooting the 8th deadliest school shooting in United States history. Following Pogortzis' arrest, various types of explosive devices and a Molotov cocktail were found in and around the school. During the investigations, a note from Pogortzis' journal suggests that not only did he want to commit the shooting, but he also wanted to commit suicide after the shooting, and had even planned on committing the act for some time. Pogortzis was handed 11 federal charges for the capital murder of 10 people and the aggravated assault against a public servant, and was held in custody without bail. If convicted, he faced a maximum sentence of 40 years to life, but due to his age, he was ineligible for the death penalty or a life sentence without parole. In June 2019, it was announced that the state trial for Pogortzis would take place in Richmond in January 2020. However, 4 months later, on the 4th of November 2019, he was found by 3 experts to be unfit to stand trial. On the 11th of February 2022, following a long mental health treatment while in custody at North Texas State Hospital, Pogortzis was again found incompetent to stand trial and was ordered to stay in the mental hospital for another 12 months. Pogortzis made an appearance in court in February 2019, where his attorney made a request for a change of venue, due to the publicity which the case had received. During the hearing, Pogortzis showed no emotions and stayed silent through the trial.
Demetrius Pogortzis turned 19 while awaiting his first in-person court appearance since last May's massacre inside Santa Fe High School.
His apparent lack of remorse was called out by a mother of one of the victims.
To see if I could see some remorse, and I didn't get it.
In a published statement, Pogortz's family extended their condolences to the victims and thanked first responders for their assistance, while also admitting they were as shocked by the event as everyone else. The parents of two of the victims filed lawsuits against Pogortz's parents with claims that his father didn't properly secure the murder weapons, which were revealed to belong to him, and that the parents were negligent in entrusting their son with the firearms. The trial is set for July 2024. Pogortz, now 23, is currently in solitary confinement and is receiving treatment as he awaits the declaration of yet another court date to find out how long he's going to be incarcerated for. With Demetrius Pogortz behind bars, we now turn to the tragic case of a 66-year-old Spanish teacher who fell victim to two of her own students.
And two teenagers accused of killing their Spanish teacher have pled guilty to first-degree murder. The Fairfield High School Spanish teacher was beaten to death in a park with a baseball bat.
When you find the mutilated corpse of an old lady who had been declared missing, your first thoughts would probably never be that the act had been committed by an adolescent. But this was the case for 66-year-old Spanish teacher Barbara Graber. Graber had been brutally murdered by not one but two adolescents, her 16-year-old student Willard Miller and his friend Jeremy Goodale. The reason why is shocking, and the reaction of the perpetrators in court will send shivers down your spine. Willard Miller had been failing his Spanish class at Fairfield High School in Iowa, and his poor grades threatened his chances of going on a study trip overseas, so he frequently argued with his teacher, Barbara Graber, over it. Miller got fed up with not having his way and devised an evil plan to take her out. His plan was to ambush her along a path where she often walked, and he would employ the services of his friend Jeremy Goodale to act as a lookout. On the 2nd of November 2021, Miller finally got the chance to act on his plan when Graber was walking along the planned path. He and Goodale were able to blindside her before repeatedly striking her with a baseball bat until she passed away. Graber obviously couldn't survive the attack, so both boys dragged her corpse into a nearby park and hid it beneath a tarp before fleeing the scene in her van, which they abandoned at the end of a rural road. Both Miller and Goodale soon became the focus of the murder investigation after Goodale sent incriminating messages to another school friend on the social media app Snapchat. Goodale's friend quickly showed the evidence to the police, who sought search warrants for the homes and mobile devices of both perpetrators of the murder. It was reported that Miller had also given hints about the murder to multiple classmates, telling one that Graber might disappear before the murder, and telling another that he had caught someone with a baseball bat the day after the murder. Graber's body was discovered the following day, covered by a tarp and wheelbarrow following tip-offs, which the police had received, including from the classmates of Miller and Goodale. Both boys were eventually arrested and brought in for questioning. Goodale and Miller initially denied their involvements, but eventually spilled the beans, although they both tried to make it seem that they had less involvement in the murder than the other. Ultimately, the evidence was stacked against them, and they were eventually charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit a forcible felony. On the 18th of April, 2023, both Goodale and Miller pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and were to be charged as adults due to the severity of the crime. Fortunately for both boys, Iowa does not permit juvenile crimes to be punished with a life sentence without the possibility of parole, but they knew they were going away for a long time. In July 2023, Miller was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 35 years before he's eligible for parole, which is 5 more years than was recommended by the prosecutors under a plea agreement. In November that year, Goodale, who had testified against Miller, received a recommended jail sentence of 25 years for his role in the murder. He and Miller were also ordered to pay $150,000 in restitution to Graber's family.
Got a nosebleed in court just as he's about to learn his fate. Jeremy Goodale pled guilty for his role in the crime that shocked America.
Numerous members of Graber's extended family showed up in court to express their pain and anger over the incident and the trauma it had caused the family ever since. They blamed Goodale for the murder as he chose not to prevent it, but some did offer words of encouragement. Goodale made a tearful apology to the family and friends of his victim, claiming that it was the worst decision of his life and that he wished he could go back in time to prevent it from ever happening.
2 years ago, I made the worst decision of my life, and I take full responsibility for what I did. And today, as a young man, I can begin to pay for that. I can never give back what I've taken.
He also apologized to the investigators for trying to mislead them during the interrogations, where he accused a gang of masked kids of perpetrating the murder and making him have to conceal the evidence. Miller, who is now 19, is currently in state custody at the Iowa Department of Corrections, while Goodale is being held at the Jefferson County Detention Center. The actions of both boys may have been horrific, but this next teenager committed an even more unspeakable crime.
What is the best place to stab someone? Is a small knife good for killing?
The case of Derek Rosa is a bizarre one, not just because of his age, but also the circumstances surrounding it and the manner in which he perpetrated the crime. Why a 13-year-old 8th grader would murder his own mother so gruesomely is up for debate, but his reaction in court was heartbreaking to say the least. On the night of Thursday the 12th of October 2023, 39-year-old Irina Garcia was asleep at her Hiley apartment complex at 211 West 79th Place, Florida, when she was suddenly attacked by her son, Derek, who stabbed her multiple dozen times with a small knife. Shortly after committing the murder, Rosa surprisingly called 911 to inform them of what he had done, and police officers arrived moments later to find the dead body of his mother in her bedroom next to the crib where her 14-day-old baby lay unharmed. Rosa, who had reportedly contemplated committing suicide, was swiftly arrested and taken into custody for questioning. Rosa's actions were shocking, to say the least. He had previously shown no real signs of mental illness and was said to be an honor roll student at school. When the news spread of his actions, no one could understand what could have been the motive behind it. Rosa also didn't stop at the brutal murder of his own mother. He went one step further and called an online friend to show them what he had done. He sent them 3 photos, including one where he was standing over his mother's corpse, and another of a pink-handed kitchen knife with blood on it, as well as a selfie of himself. Rosa was said to have also made several online searches to know how best to commit the stabbings. This was further evidence that the murder of his mom was premeditated. Following his arrest, Rosa was interrogated by detectives and confessed to killing his mother. 46 times he reportedly stabbed her, which meant he had continued to stab her even after she was probably dead. Video footage from the doorbell camera of the apartment also surfaced and showed events from a few hours before the murder was committed.
That moment right before and after he is accused of stabbing his mother to death.
At a pre-trial hearing in December 2023, Rosa, who had dozens of supporters in court, including his maternal grandmother and his father, was questioned over his actions following his confession. Rosa was absent at his next court hearing on April 3, 2024, but he was represented by his family and tens of supporters who crowded the entrance to the court. Another hearing was set for May 2024. During his December 2023 court interrogation, Rosa became emotional as his confession to the investigators was being played in court.
The chilling interrogation video played in court. 13-year-old Derek Rosa allegedly confessing to brutally stabbing his mother, Irina Garcia, to death.
He put his head down as he appeared to begin crying, feeling devastated as the true extent of his actions dawned upon him. In reaction to the horrific confession, the judge ordered that he be held at an adult jail. Rosa pled not guilty to the charges, as he is set to be charged with first-degree murder as an adult and awaits trial for his verdict. Depending on how he is tried, he could face anywhere between 20 years and life imprisonment for his actions. Rosa, still only 14, is currently being held at the Metro West Detention Center, but his attorneys are reportedly pushing to have him moved back to a juvenile detention center, as they continue to push against the prosecutor's wishes to charge him as an adult. Investigations are still ongoing, so the fate of Rosa is left to be unknown. Up next, this teenager chose the worst possible way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
It's cold-blooded murder. Cold-blooded murder, young man.
It's not uncommon to see a teenager commit a robbery, but 17-year-old Michael Swanson would take it too far when he not only robbed 2 convenience stores, but ended up gruesomely murdering the attendants. His reaction to being sentenced for these crimes sent shockwaves down the spine of everyone in court. On Monday, the 15th of November, 2010, at the age of 17, Michael Swanson allegedly stole his mother's car and his grandfather's .40 caliber handgun and drove to northern Iowa in search of a thrill. Just after 9 p.m. that day, a young man wearing a ski mask walked into a Crossroads gas station in Algona, Iowa, where he demanded cash and cigarettes from the clerk, 47-year-old Vicky Bowman Hall. Despite complying with his request, the young man chose to shoot her anyway, leaving her for dead as he fled the scene in a Jeep Grand Cherokee. About an hour later, the same young man appeared at a come-and-go convenience store in Humboldt, about 30 miles south of Algona. where he once again demanded cash from the clerk, this time 61-year-old Sheila Myers. Despite Myers handing him the cash he'd asked for, he had already made up his mind just like the prior incident and shot her anyway, in the face, from only 2 feet away. She died instantly and he quickly fled the scene once again. That young man turned out to be 17-year-old Michael Swanson. Before committing those murders, Swanson had driven from St. Louis Park to northern Minnesota to Iowa in a car he had stolen from his mother, Kathleen, along with her debit cards earlier that morning. This wasn't the first time he had stolen his mother's car, his mother, Kathleen, testifying that he'd had violent and sometimes criminal tendencies since he was a toddler. When he was only 11, she was told by a psychiatrist that he was a lost cause when she reported to them that he was a threat to their family members. Swanson had been clinically diagnosed with a host of mental disorders, including ADHD and bipolar disorder, amongst others. One time in 2006 for assembling and storing dangerous weapons, which his aunt discovered in a car trunk after she demanded the money he had stolen from her nonprofit organization where he was doing community service. These dangerous behaviors were a well-known ticking time bomb that would eventually lead Swanson to his downfall. During the second murder, police had received reports of the first from witnesses and began tracing the trail to Swanson. Swanson had managed to get to a McDonald's in Webster City, about 60 miles from Algona, before he was caught and arrested. The police officers also recovered the stolen money and cigarettes, as well as the handgun he used in perpetrating the murders. When interrogated over the murders, Swanson told the police that he shot them so they wouldn't be able to call police or identify him. During his prosecution, Swanson showed no remorse over his actions, as he confessed there was a deliberate attempt to murder Myers. Swanson was eventually charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of robbery. At his first hearing over the murder of Myers in June 2011, the jury reached a quick verdict and Swanson was found guilty of both charges, after which he flipped off the TV cameras. At his second trial that July, he was also found guilty of the robbery and murder of Bowman Hall. For his role in the murders of Myers and Bowman Hall, a then 18-year-old Swanson was handed 2 life sentences without the eligibility of parole. During his sentencing, Swanson could be seen smiling and laughing as his verdict was read.
Blooded murder, young man. And your counsel wants us to believe that you lack the capacity, that you were insane.
Jillian, the daughter of Bowman Hall, confronted Swanson in an emotional statement, calling him a weak coward.
My mom was not only completely 100% innocent, but she was also a defenseless woman when you came in with that gun.
Johnson reportedly told a psychiatrist that he had been fascinated by murder and committing acts of violence since he was 13, and intended to wait until he was 18 so he could kill his parents, who he had planned to be his first victims. In 2013, Swanson's sentence was revised to 60 years before parole eligibility by the governor of Iowa, Terry Branstad, who decided to commute the life sentences of 38 Iowa inmates who had been convicted as juveniles. In November 2014, Swanson was charged with attempted murder while in prison for attacking a fellow inmate with a knife. He was convicted of this charge in 2015 and sentenced to an additional 25 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole in 2089 at the age of 96. Safe to say he's heading for a life behind bars, but our next teen committed one of the most brutal crimes in Florida's history.
Tonight, the sister of this 8-year-old girl killed by her then teenage neighbor in one of Jacksonville's biggest murder cases. Well, her sister says she is sick, thinking that her sister's killer could possibly walk free one day.
Murder is not a crime that one would expect from a child, gruesome murder especially. And that is why, to this day, it is both shocking and sad to hear the story of Joshua Phillips. It was a day like any other in Duval County until it wasn't. An 8-year-old girl, Maddie Clifton, was mistakenly hit by a baseball and would not stop crying. Her cries scared 14-year-old neighbor Joshua Phillips, with whom she had been playing, and in fear that her crying would attract the attention of people around and get him in trouble with his father, who was reportedly mistreating him and would punish him for having friends in the house. The young teenager did the unimaginable. What Joshua Phillips did to avoid getting into trouble with his father will go down in history as one of the most brutal crimes committed in Jacksonville, Florida. In November 1998, the entire neighborhood and the police set out to search for its young member. Everyone, including Joshua Phillips' mother, began handing out flyers of the missing child to people, asking if they'd seen her. While the search party was still out there looking for the little girl, Joshua Phillips' mother made a shocking, gory discovery. Under her teenage son's waterbed was the lifeless body of the missing Maddie Clifton. It turns out that Joshua Phillips had, in a bid to stop Maddie from crying, dragged her into the house he lived in with his parents, hit her repeatedly with a baseball bat until he thought she was dead. When he finished, he then hid her body under his waterbed. His dad returned from work and Joshua was terrified to discover that Maddie was still breathing and moaning. He then stabbed her multiple times until she died. It wasn't until a week after Joshua had killed Maddie that Joshua's mother found the missing body and alerted the authorities. The murder of that little girl was traumatizing for everyone involved. Both the families of the girl who was murdered and the teenager who had committed the crime were distraught. The court initially sentenced Phillips to life imprisonment without parole. But in 2005, the Supreme Court ruled that it is unconstitutional to sentence a child to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. State laws required that another hearing be conducted after 25 years to reassess the situation and see whether or not a person who is convicted as a child is fit to rejoin society. This is required for all juvenile convictions involving death.
It eroded our marriage, replaced love with grief, deep sadness, and a pain that no family should ever have to bear.
At the resentencing, the family of the deceased, her mother, father, and sister all came to testify against Phillips.
Why should the defendant be allowed to live normally while Maddie lies in cold in a grave?
The state of Phillips' mind is not certain as he watches the court proceeding, blinking repeatedly, his face expressionless. The late Maddie's mother then goes on to say that if her daughter's murderer was ever released from jail, she hoped she'd no longer be on earth. Reports held that Phillips has been of good behavior in prison, has won multiple awards, and became a Buddhist monk. He also hopes to live in a monastery for the rest of his life if he gets out of jail. Reports also confirmed that Phillips is indeed sorry for his actions. The family of the deceased did not appear to care about that as they insisted that their daughter and sister's murderer should not be allowed to live freely, stating that Joshua hadn't just deprived their daughter of her right to live and them of the joy of watching her grow, but also that her death had put a strain on their marriage. Despite the evidence of good behavior on Josh's part, the judge upheld the original sentence of the court. Joshua will remain in jail for the rest of his life. One might find the conviction of Joshua Phillips to be harsh since he committed these crimes as a young teenager, but wait until you hear the story of Kenneth Young.
They was like, well, Mr. Young, you're not going home no more, you're gonna die in prison. I'm like, who gonna die? I ain't dying in prison. So I was in denial of that because it happened so fast. It's just like, one day I'm 15 years old and I'm in society, then the next, I'm out and you telling me I ain't gonna never go home? That's kind of like hard to deal with.
Young was given consecutive life sentences for a crime he committed at the age of 14. Kenneth Young was just 14 years old when he was coerced into joining an armed robbery gang, founded by his mother's substance dealer, who was at the time 24 years old. He had participated in a series of armed robberies with the gang, and one other that was unsuccessful before they were apprehended by police. The prosecutor charged Kenneth Young and the rest of the gang with armed robbery and attempted armed robbery. Young was given consecutive life sentences without the option of parole, despite his young age and the circumstances surrounding the crime he'd committed. Firstly, there was no murder, and secondly, Young participated in these criminal activities alongside adults who should have known better and shouldn't have forced him to participate. Kenneth had also reportedly dissuaded his mother's substance dealer and fellow gang member from committing the crime of rape while they were on a robbery mission. Just as with Joshua Phillips, fortune smiled on Kenneth Young when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Graham v. Florida that it was unconstitutional to sentence a child to life imprisonment without parole for a crime that did not result in the death of any person. A documentary on children in prison, 15 to Life, featured Kenneth Young and his struggle as an adult who went to jail as a child was discussed. The point of the documentary was to educate the world on how the system convicts children, especially colored children, leaving them to grow old and rot in prison. The documentary stressed that children who committed crimes when they were none the wiser should be given a second chance.
Sometimes mama lock me and my sister in a room and she just be gone.
In most cases where a teenager or a child is involved in a criminal act, there is an adult who is either neglectful, indulgent, or abusive. In the case of Kenneth Young, his mother was neglectful. Kenneth Young's mother, a former substance addict, held herself responsible for how her son turned out and expressed that she prayed for forgiveness and hope that her son can get a second chance. She also said that her son has been very instrumental in her journey towards ending her addiction. When he found out about his sentence, Kenneth says he was in denial because it all happened so fast. Despite being astonished by his lengthy sentence, Young showed remorse for his actions. One may blame Kenneth's mother for her negligence and letting her dealer around her teenage son. But what Nehemiah Griego did to his parents and siblings leaves room for even more questions about his parents' parenting.
Emotions have run high today in the resentencing of Nehemiah Griego, who killed his parents and 3 little siblings when he was just 15. He's now looking at 3 consecutive life sentences.
As a 15-year-old boy, young Griego ended the lives of 5 people. The horrifying part? These people were members of his family. That's right. The teenager murdered his parents and 3 of his siblings, aged 9, 5, and 2. Griego shot his mother first, and when confronted by his little brother, who had been asleep by her side, he shot him too. The young teenager then went to his already distraught sister's bedroom and shot them too. After killing his mother and 3 of his siblings, he waited for his father to return home from work and shot him dead too. Griego then lied to his girlfriend that his parents had been killed in an accident and drove to church, where he told his pastor and a member of the church the same lie. The church member, who was a retired homicide detective, however, suspected that something was wrong and immediately alerted the police. Griego confessed to killing his family, stating that he'd been having suicidal and homicidal thoughts, and then mentioned that his mother had angered him earlier and that he was just frustrated with his mother.
If he is released, I believe he will do harm to himself or others. One predominant reason he had mentioned multiple times to both my sister Vanessa and I was that he had been hearing voices since he was 12 years old, telling him to kill.
She assured the court that his action was not a reaction to mistreatment. His uncle admits that the actions of his nephew have caused his family pain, but he believes that Griego should be given a second chance. At first, a judge sentenced him as a juvenile, and he was taken to a juvenile facility where he stayed until he clocked 21. After he officially became an adult, the Attorney General argued that Griego had not been rehabilitated and as such may still pose a danger to society. The court agreed and sentenced him to life imprisonment with the probability of parole, paying no attention to Griego's attorney, who stated that sentencing Griego to jail for life was a cruel and unusual punishment. The state's attorney reminded the court that the fact that Griego could murder 5 members of his own family reflects just how detached, callous, and brutal he is capable of being. While Griego didn't show much emotion at the start of the retrial, as the judge read out his sentence, he was caught from behind wiping tears from his eyes. Griego will be eligible for parole when he turns 52. If you thought those angry teenagers were troubled, just wait until you see the shocking stories we've got lined up in our next video.